He had tunnelled down into the spring located in the limestone outcrop to increase the water flow to the area in which the Great Pyramid was going to be built. He had dug a moat around the outcrop and used the water to perfectly level all the perimeter base, then kept raising the water level up the outcrop to create steep, level steps up the rocky hill. Eddie then proceeded to dig a smooth roadway down to his newly created harbour, with a channel at the side to drain the excess water away from the pyramid side. All the rubble from the excavations was neatly piled, and now Jeff and his team were waiting for some blocks to be delivered from the quarry site upstream. Eddie looked on in bemusement as finally a flotilla of little rafts came floating downstream with their cargo securely strapped underneath. The site's dock manager Jeff was taken aback with the situation he was faced with. He had pre-organised his staff to be ready to drag the rafts with a block tied on top out of the river, onto a jetty where wooden rollers would be placed underneath and they'll be dragged up a steep incline to the building site, where the block was barred off the raft onto rollers where the builders would now take over and drag and place it into position. Jeff's supervisors asked what they should do now.
What should we do now?
Not a problem, he replied. Just drag the blocks onto the jetty and put the rollers straight under the block with a couple of boards on top of the rollers, then drag the block up the incline to the site. This system worked well, and Jeff was actually pleased that the blocks were strapped underneath the rafts, as it simplified the whole unloading process, making everything much faster. As the days went on, Jeff realised that the blocks were coming downstream at an ever-increasing rate, and a backlog of rafts was now building up, blocking the site port, causing chaos on the river. The site could not be cleared any faster, as his dragging teams were already exhausted from constantly dragging blocks up a steep hill in the burning sun. Jeff was beginning to panic as the huge expanse of floating blocks was growing bigger every day. And he nearly had a riot when he asked his already shattered workforce to speed up. Jeff's assistant, Andy, was a farmer when he wasn't working at the pyramids, and had learnt over the years to dig lagoons as high up and as far inland as the flood waters stretched. When the flood receded, Andy still had a huge amount of water stored to irrigate his land for the rest of the year. The further he stored his water away from the Nile, the more land he could irrigate, the more food he could grow. Over the years, Andy's family had become experts in water management by using canals, locks and sluice gates to control water and sedoofs to raise the water even higher up the valley. Andy had an idea to help Jeff's situation. He explained to him that the blocks had quite happily floated many miles downstream from the quarry to their site. So why don't they save time dragging the blocks out of the water and dragging them up a steep hill on expensive, quickly worn out rollers, and instead build walls either side of the road leading to the building site, and then fill it with water and locks. The pyramid site overflow water was redirected down into the now high-walled causeway, and numerous simple lock gates were built into it. Multiple blocks could be floated together through the locks up to the build area. After a few weeks of trial and error, Jeff could finally feel relaxed as he looked up from the harbour side. It was gratifying watching the men, women, cows and camels working together to open and close the lock gates in perfect sequence to raise the blocks high up to the plateau on the horizon. He was pleased how easily the massive blocks were being raised, without the constant stress of moaning workers with bad backs, blisters, rope snaps, blocks falling off the rollers, or rolling backwards injuring workers, and the constant requirement to find decent wood to use and replace the quickly worn out planks, rollers and bars. Morale on the site was good. The workers were well housed and well fed, and the whole family could stay and work together. With the blocks hanging underneath the rafts, the majority of the hard manual labour had gone. The constant pulling and dragging huge weights uphill with the fear of snapping rope and runaway blocks had gone. Above all, the workers could see huge progress for their efforts. The whole process greatly increased the speed of raising the blocks, and the backlog in the harbour was now starting to disappear. The large foundation blocks were being floated up through a series of gates into the pyramid's perimeter moat. Then they were floated into precise position around the limestone outcrop. As each layer was completed, the moat water was raised, and the huge blocks were laid onto the next step cut into the hill, with the builders using the water to make sure the whole project was being constructed level. Bob, the quarry manager, had come downstream to see Jeff and make sure everything was going okay. He explained that upstream, the quarry workers had noticed that the limestone was staying soft while being stored in the water, so they decided to cut the angles into the blocks while they were still in the water at the quarry site, and used a simple template in the quarry floor, and then used the water to give a precise, accurate angle on every perimeter block, so then they could send ready cut angled blocks down to the site. He also explained that in the future the blocks would have 2 mushroom-shaped notches cut into the blocks. These would be used to tie the ropes around to attach the floats to the blocks. Bob said that by doing this, it saved them having to lift the blocks every time to get the rope around. Jeff said it was a brilliant idea, as the blocks could now be floated and pushed straight into position on the pyramid, without having to place wedges underneath to take the ropes off and bar the blocks down into position. Jeff was now coming towards the end of the first build season. He noticed that it was taking longer to raise the blocks than the gate system. After a bit of investigation, he found the amount of water flow from the spring in the outcrop had massively slowed down, probably due to the water level in the whole country lowering, as the flood season was now over. Just to add to his problems, the port manager, Adam, said the first delivery of the huge 50-ton, 8 metres long granite ceiling beams had been floated down the 500 miles and delivered from the quarries at Aswan, and that they were floating in the harbour, ready to be delivered to the higher plateau. Adam explained these slabs were too long to fit in between the lock gates, and something had to be done as they were blocking up his harbour. "Can't you just drag them up there like that massive statue we moved last year?" "If it was just one block," said Jeff, "I might have agreed with you. But there's dozens of them. It'd take all the manpower we've got, and so much time. Everything would just grind to a halt. No, I'm sure we can find a way to float them up there." Jeff really didn't fancy telling his staff that they would have to drag all these beams up to the plateau, especially as morale was high, and everyone was already talking about how they were looking forward to meeting up again next year. Jeff instructed that every other gate in the lock system be dismantled, and for the walls and doors to be strengthened, extended and heightened to create bigger steps between the gates. Jeff floated in one of the large beams into the first lock section, and it just fit. But the problem he now saw was that huge amounts of water was needed to fill each lock section, and gallons of extra water was needed to raise the height enough to float the beams into the next area. Lifting slowed down to a near crawl. At dinner, while pondering his problems, he threw some of his hard crusts away, and some landed in a nearby half-full water jar. A crow was hanging around the dinner table, looking for scraps, and promptly picked up some pebbles with its beak and dropped them into the jar. The crow kept repeating this until the food had floated up to the top of the jar, and then flew away with its prize. This inspired Jeff, so he immediately had some huge bales made of papyrus. These were then attached to wooden seesaws at the side of the locks. Now, every time a slab was floated into the lock, as soon as the rear gate was shut, Jeff lowered the huge bales into the water, and even got a couple of people to stand on top to push them even deeper. The bales displaced the water, and the level rose twice as high as it was before, and the blocks easily floated onto the next section. Seesaws with papyrus bales were added to each section, and the slab raising process started to speed up. But now the floodwater has started to recede down into the valley, with the land exposed, covered in the thick black silt deposited by the water. The pyramid season was now nearly to an end, and the majority of his staff were leaving site to tend to their newly fertilised fields. Bob looked at his friends and smiled.
Well, that was a lot less effort and pain than I was expecting. Remember when the architect thought moving blocks on sailboats would have been an easy way to move them up the Nile? Can you imagine trying to get them on and off the boats? It would have been a disaster. The floor of the canal would have been littered with fallen cargo. It would indeed, said Jeff. It would indeed. Bob, Eddie and Jeff raise a glass and drink to a very successful pyramid building season.